So recently a case has gone viral about a famous Instagram squirrel, Peanut, who was seized and killed by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Peanut was taken from Mark Longo's home in rural Pine City, along with a raccoon named Fred, who was also killed. Peanut was rescued by Mark and Daniela Longo 7 years ago because the squirrel's mother was unfortunately killed and hit by a car. So apparently some person somewhere, apparently she doesn't even live in New York, just saw this Instagram famous squirrel and reported them to the DEC. The DEC then proceeded to get a search warrant signed off by 4 departments and a judge, who I believe are all under investigation now. So the word euthanization is being used here, but I think we should call this for what it really is: state kidnapping, tyranny, and murder. The reason the DEC have given for their actions was because they wanted to test the animals for rabies, which apparently involves killing them, even though on their own website it clearly states that it's very rare for squirrels to develop rabies. I mean, seriously, that's besides the point. 12 guys bombard your house to kill a squirrel and a raccoon. I mean, it's clearly a case of government overreach, specifically blue state liberal democratic nonsense. I saw this meme recently and I think it's quite funny, but I also do think this is a good example of why the Second Amendment is completely justified for American citizens, or any citizens around the world. We should all have that right, because if the state can just come in, barge down your door, treat you like a criminal, and literally kill your companion animals, who many of us consider family members, it is warranted to consider 2A as a necessary and fundamental right. That is the constitutional relationship between the citizen and the state. You guys leave each other alone, we'll leave you alone, you leave us alone. We're only going to intervene if there's low lives or criminals harassing you. That's the beauty of small government, but apparently we've strayed quite far from that now. Apparently the state can just come in and kill your companion animals.
And 10 to 12 DEC officers raided my house as if I was a drug dealer. I was sat outside my house for 5 hours. I had to get a police escort to my bathroom. I wasn't even allowed to feed my rescue horses breakfast or lunch. I was sat there like a criminal after they interrogated my wife to check out her immigration status, then proceeded to ask me if I had cameras in my house. Then proceeded to go through every cabinet, nook, and cranny of my house for a squirrel and a raccoon.
They got a search warrant?
They got a search warrant. 4 departments and a judge signed off on a search warrant for a squirrel and a raccoon. He's helped people. He's helped kids gather joy. And then we started a nonprofit animal rescue called Peanut's Freedom Farm to help animals like Peanut fight a good fight when they're in a neglected case or they're sitting in a slaughter auction. And he was the cornerstone of our life and our organization.
How did you find out that they euthanized Peanut?
They haven't messaged me. They haven't called me. They haven't given me a formal statement whatsoever. The last time I heard from the DEC was when they left my house. Another news station called me with their statement, and that's how I found out Peanut is gone. They didn't even have the heart to call me themselves to tell me what was going on. This state has more problems than a squirrel and a raccoon, and we're using our taxpayers' dollars to help take these animals out of a comfortable place.
To your point, yes, we're going to be, moving forward with some legal action. We can't talk much about it right now as we are in the beginning stages of it. The fact of the matter is, we were heavily mistreated. There were so many violated constitutional rights in this situation, and it's not even funny.
So yeah, that's completely horrific, and I agree with Longo here. He doesn't say it here, he says it elsewhere, that there is a special place in hell for the people responsible for reporting this, first of all, the person who made the call to murder these animals, and the people who carried that action out. As alluded to by Mark, is this really the biggest issue facing New York or the blue states? It seems like they have a lot of other problems they should deal with, like rapists, like illegal immigrants, like the fact that their entire streets have turned into garbage heaps, to be honest. But anyway, that's not really the angle I want to take here. So I'm gonna leave links to Mark and Daniela's social media. If you can help them, reach out to them, give them money, give them support, whatever you can. I do think this is really, really important and has happened at a very interesting time in our society. So I want to make a comment on the broader discourse as well, because there's a lot of talk about the horrors of big government, talk I 100% agree with, but I think the bigger issue here is not just the fact that the squirrel Peanut was someone's companion animal, or the fact that the blue states, a lot of them have kind of turned into insane tyrants. That's all true, by the way, but the bigger problem, the bigger issue at heart here is the fact that the squirrel Peanut is an individual who values his own life. his own liberty and his own pursuit of happiness. And that's what really makes this whole thing so fucked up. I've watched countless footage of that squirrel, and it's very clear to me this animal has way more freedom and happiness than any animal I've ever seen in nature. And that's another myth that really needs to be dispelled here, because I see people keep commenting, oh, they could have just released him back into the wild instead of killing him, but he would literally die if released back into the wild now. And that also misses the point, because animals don't have freedom in nature. In the wild, if an animal goes around the corner, there's someone waiting to kill him or her. In winter, a lot of the species just die because they have nothing to shield themselves against harsh weather. It would be the equivalent of a human going to do the groceries and there's someone waiting around the corner there to kill them. Or winter comes and, you know, a lot of the human race just dies because they don't have any protection against the weather. That's what we're dealing with here in the state of nature, which a lot of people just refuse to acknowledge. Like, there's no other real way to say it. Nature is a death machine for animals. If you believe in animal rights, it follows that you believe in wild animal rights. The problem is a lot of vegans don't get behind or even seem to understand the idea of wild animal rights, even though it's one of the most straightforward things ever. And I think I've heard these reasons, like they're scared of what people think, they think it's too out there an idea, but I hate to break it to you, if you're vegan and into animal rights, people already think you're crazy, so there's not a reason to not help wild animals in nature. And that entire reason is just about your insecurities, and that is really messed up. If you're considering your own insecurities versus a calf who is being ripped from their mother's womb because a predator is attacking them, that is really fucked up. I mean, if you want to talk about messed up priorities, just talk to a vegan who doesn't support the idea of wild animal rights. There just has to be, at some point, wild animal rights, rights against each other and rights against the state. Let's say the right to not be tortured, the right to a comfortable habitat, the right for protection against other animals. And this is already happening, and it begins with positive human intervention into nature. And we're already seeing that happen through sanctuaries just like Mark and Daniela's. So in addition to wild animal rights, I also just really want to talk about how modern environmentalists have become something like a satanic death cult of nature and the natural world. Think about the way they treat wild animals. If one of the animals gets a disease, they're literally killed. Like, there's no let's maybe try and develop a cure for this disease. There's no, or maybe we can isolate the animal. No one with an environmental career is actually smart enough to come up with cures for diseases and things like that. It's not really a real science, like the study of conservation. If an animal gets a disease, they literally are murdered because they're sick. That's basically their mentality. Like, imagine treating a human that way. You're sick, so we're literally going to kill you now. Of course, there's exceptions like euthanasia, but the majority of animals that are killed, or at least a lot of the animals that are killed, are not dying of a terminal illness. They simply have a disease that they don't have a cure for, and they don't want them affecting the other species. So they don't try and come up with solutions or centers for sick animals. When animals rape and kill each other and like rip each other to shreds, environmentalists film it and win awards. Like, if you want an example of socially accepted psychotic behavior and language, just read any one of those nature magazines that document the way predators eat prey, the way animals are attacking each other, and just the violence that happens in nature, just the way it's observed by these nature magazines that almost celebrate the suffering and death in nature simply because it's good for the ecosystem. It's like the definition of psychotic for me. So conservationists believe in murdering animals for a healthy ecosystem. That's what they support. If one group of animals needs to be culled, they'll just cull them. If one group, it's all utilitarian in nature. They don't see animals as individuals' moral value, like how they see humans. So they'll kill them for a healthy ecosystem and good air and water. Imagine applying that logic to humans or other animals. Like, sorry, we're gonna have better air now, so we're just gonna. It's completely insane and psychotic, and no one sees it that way because we've just been conditioned to look at certain things a certain way, and nature is one of them. So this is the very reason this idea that something has to be natural to be good, or if something is natural, therefore it's also good. This underpins the entire reason why they can't stand to see wild animals happy. Like, I can imagine environmentalists sitting there watching that Instagram page of Peanut the squirrel and just seething, like they'd just be simmering with hatred because they hate to see wild animals happy. This is a fact about environmentalists. That's like Hitler to them, watching that page. It would be like the worst evil, seeing wild animals happy, and this is despite the fact that most wild animals, most living things, prefer creature comfort and human company, good human company, over the shithole that's nature, and that's completely rational. I mean, the state of nature is arguably worse than the worst possible human or animal like domesticated animal life on Earth. In the state of nature, as Hobbes said, it is nasty, brutish, and short. There's parasites in nature, there's flesh-eating diseases, no medical health care, drastic weather conditions, and natural disaster. So people like whoever that idiot was that reported Peanut to the DEC, and the DEC themselves, these people are happy to live in air-conditioned homes, use their smartphones, have indoor heating, and they would consider it a real violation of their human rights if they were forced to live in something that is like the state of nature. Maybe not even as bad, like a quarter as bad as the state of nature. They would absolutely hate it, and yet they condemn wild animals to a lifetime of this. And if wild animals somehow find their way to a better life, they knock on the door and they kill them. So have you noticed that in the past couple of years, maybe more, that people are starting to really turn on environmentalism? Because I have. And I think they're starting to notice that these people, more often than not, happen to be psychotic authoritarian lowlives disguised as moral crusaders. And I've now heard some pretty smart people say that, of course, climate change is an issue, which I also believe, but that it's been wildly exaggerated by environmentalists for whatever reason, I don't know, to instill fear, to control people. Like, I wouldn't really put anything past them anymore, since they've shown that they'll literally come to your door and kill your pets. And if anyone has recently seen Greta Thunberg's ongoing ridiculous pro-Palestine nonsense, you realize just how unhinged this movement has become. So it's also just really unclear what utility state environmental departments play in people's lives. I was thinking about this today, and I guess I'd like to ask you the same question, is have you ever benefited from a state environmental department's existence? It seems like they only cause problems for people, in addition to being violent psychos towards animals. My intuition is that they're actually the number one problem for preventing, number one barrier to human progress and technological innovation. And actually, Joe Rogan and Donald Trump talked about this recently on the Joe Rogan podcast.
So the environmental is the biggest tool for stopping growth, the biggest tool. The other is regulation. And if you speak to Elon, he said the regulation now to send a rocket up to anywhere, even if you do everything, it's becoming impossible. But they use environmental in order to get people not to do anything. And sometimes I say, I look at some of I know the environmental stuff better because I had to build buildings in New York. I had to do environmental impact studies. And I would see some of these guys that I'd hire for a lot of money, environmentalists that would get you through the process, and they'd be up in Albany, that's the capital of New York, and they're up there trying to make it tougher for guys like me that were builders because they'd get paid more money. In other words, I had one guy, highly recommended, I was good at getting permits. I was one of the kings of guys. I was always very good. But the environmental stuff was always horrible. They could slow a project down 10 years, 15 years. I had a project in Louisiana, built big LNG plant. It was for 14 years. It was going to cost $18 billion, one of the biggest, like the Empire State Building, laying down on its side times 4. Massive on the coast, on the Gulf Coast. And they said, sir, they're going to give it up. I said, they shouldn't give it up. What's the problem? They can't get their environmental. They had environmental permits that would fill this whole room up to the ceiling. And they said there was one mistake on one little line. They wanted to do it all over again. It's not going to happen. And I got them their permit instantly. New York, they go to Albany.
Okay.
And they convince people that if you have a certain type of plant on the ground that's this big and, in theory, valueless, that it's a rare plant and you cannot ever even touch it. You can't go near it. You can't put a building on it. You can't do anything. Or there's a little puddle, and they call it a lake. And you have to go by the standards of a lake. I said, no, that's a puddle. Oh, you have no idea. Guys are filling a little puddle. You have no idea what they do.
And
and they use it as a way to stop you.
They use it as a way to stop you, and also as a way to generate money. I'm curious how they're generating money that way, though.
Well, they get fees.
They get fees.
Massive fees.
The same thing.
That's so right. That's basically, and he admits he'd do the same thing, because that's what a lot of environmentalist consultants and people do, because they're not actually adding any utility to society. They're not adding any moral value from what we've seen. So they've got to make money somehow. So this is what they do. They just drag out litigation, processes, procedures.
And
pay these guys
people rely on them as experts because they're the people that they go to when they have to run these studies in the first place.
But some of them are just bad guys, and they're trying to make it more and more difficult.
And they have a lot of power.
I think they maybe had more. They didn't have as much with me because I would get through them, and I understood it. Look, I've done so many they call it environmental impact study. I did so much to build a building. To build a building in New York is very tough. You got to deal with, think of it, financing, unions, all the municipal stuff, environmental. Of all of it, to me, the toughest thing was the environmental. because they could stop you cold with the environmental impact study stuff. And you hire a so-called expert. They say, sir, he's the one guy, he can get you through the morass. It's a morass. It's horrible. They use it as a weapon. They use it all over the country.
Right, but there are legitimate concerns about environmental impact, correct? Like, look about the BP oil spill. There's a lot of things that do happen that are environmentally devastating. And you want to mitigate that as much as possible.
You do. Look, I had, during our 4 years, we had the cleanest air and the cleanest...
Everyone needs clean air and water. The environment is instrumentally valuable to humans and animals in that we should have clean air and water. We should have a clean landscape. But it is not intrinsically morally valuable. It's not like a person or an animal, and to treat it as such and to put it before animals and people, it's just logically insane. So yeah, that's kind of the issue. Like, they're just creating more and more problems for people, trying to get things done and trying to improve the world, whether it's morally or whether it's through the construction of new technology and buildings. So they don't care about animal rights. They don't really care about human utility. It's like, they don't care about anything worth caring about is what I'm saying. I mean, it all just becomes kind of hilarious once you really look at it properly. I've just come to realize these people do more harm than good, assuming they do any good at all. Like, honestly, at this point, I would really be in favor of dissolving the DEC and all state environmental departments and a lot of state departments in general, like DEI. I don't really understand what utility they're playing in our society. They seem to be making it worse. And I really think it'll just continue to be this way until we collectively say no to these people and get rid of some of these departments and institutions, because they've really just polluted our psyche as a society, has a whole of humanity with some of the worst and most deranged evil ideas ever, especially with regards to wild animals.